The issue of accountability and transparency, especially when we look at not just the U.S., but perhaps the biggest humanitarian organization, as we mentioned, is the UN. The UN has one of its biggest presence now in Liberia, about 15,000 UN troops, peacekeepers in Liberia, and the EU is there, the US is there, so I mean, Liberia is teeming with humanitarian groups. Billions of dollars have been poured into Liberia, but we don't see where this money is going, and the people's lives have not been changed. Poverty continues to increase. Since 2003, we're talking about perhaps close to maybe $3–4 billion have been poured into Liberia. Yet and still, poverty is increasing. And so where is this money going to? We see that the money is going to the UN's peacekeepers. They are the new elite in the country. They're riding around in the best cars. They're eating in the best restaurants. They make more money per month than most Liberians make an entire year. They have access to resources that most Liberians have no access to. I mean, so you literally see where the money is coming in, but it's going right in the pockets of the peacekeepers and all that. And it's very similar to USAID, you know. Very same things happening. Because in fact, I went and explored that possibility of how I could get some USAID money to do projects. And they're not giving it to a grassroots organization. You got to go to the government and that kind of stuff. As a result of this, there's high inflation in the country because you got tremendous amount of money, but only a few people having it. But the prices have gone up. Rice have gone up. Rice, which is our staple, has almost doubled in price. Cement, which is another core product in the country, has almost doubled in price, especially since we're trying to reconstruct the nation. Gasoline is also very high, higher, maybe almost double in price. We know it's globally, but gasoline. And then housing also. Housing, because the UN need a lot of housing and they got the money to pay for it, so now the poor people have no place to stay. And if you want a place to stay, you got to be paying some money. I mean, I was just telling a relative of mine, someone working with the UN can afford in Liberia to pay $1,600 for a 2-bedroom apartment. $1,600 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And this is the kind of money that most Liberians do not even have to pay for a year of housing. But you have that kind of money floating around in the hands of a few. And that's the problem. When I talk about African indigenous knowledge being undermined, because again, this is the driving force for most countries, you know, its own knowledge systems and all that. Because of the domination of the UN and the US and the EU and China right now in the economy and all that, it is weakening this knowledge system because people now no longer trust their own capacity. As I told you, they're depending on the Chinese to do everything, like they depended on the US before. So it is undermining, weakening their own capacity. And so, again, this is, again, for me, the negative side of humanitarian aid. And so, in conclusion, I think that, aid is a positive thing, but we need to ask the international donors to be more accountable and be more transparent, so that we know what are the strings that are being attached to this aid and not pretend like they're doing it just for manipulative reasons. Like I said, we saw the benevolence before, we saw where it led us to. Okay? And then also, we're asking them to be transparent and accountable, because this is what they're asking African governments to do. They say that African governments should be transparent and accountable, but then they themselves are not transparent and accountable. I mean, we see that in the UN, I mean, in the US. So the thoughts are that these organizations, international organizations, need to demonstrate this kind of transparency and accountability that they're asking African governments and African organizations to. Sure. So, I mean, those are the few comments that I have. Come out of the experience of aid to Liberia, especially during President Ronald Reagan, is very instructive, because Liberia's connection with America, you know, Liberia has this historical connection with America. I don't know if you all know that Liberia was really started by America as almost by a foundation between the American colonization society. So there's this connection. In fact, a lot of U.S. military went there and upset this. But in 1980, we had a military coup. And so almost America decided at that time that there was a need for a change in government. And there are a lot of discussion while I was in Liberia, a lot of discussion centered around, again, this whole political influence, because at the time the Soviets were really trying to get inroads into Africa, particularly in Liberia. And the Liberian president decided to accept Soviet assistance and embassy and all that. And so many folks believe that the U.S. decided to do regime change. And so when the regime changed, in fact, before the regime changed, Talbot, President William R. Talbot, had come to America, in fact, Carter at the time, and asked for military aid. And Carter said that the U.S. we ain't got no military aid to give. But as soon as the regime change occurred, in fact, Reagan then came in power, and the regime change occurred, America gave Liberia more than $500 million military aid. And so as a result then, when the regime changed under Samuel Doe, who was a military dictator, he had all of the arms that he now needed to maintain power. And so what now happened then is set up the country for the civil crisis, because so much arms were in the country and the government was so well armed like it had never been before, that there was little political discussion anymore. And so people decided now the only way that we can deal with this government is through military. And so literally the country experienced about 20 years, 25 years of civil crisis, complete destruction. So my own view is that what we see in America is not just unique to America. My view is that it speaks to our humanity and the duality in our humanity. That in each of us we have this possibility to do good or to do evil. And that if we're not able, as a psychologist, if you're not able to manage your evil side, then it takes over, and literally, then you begin to engage in these kinds of destructive kinds of behaviors. And we see that, again, like I said, even in Africa, when we were talking about Rwanda, or even in the case of Liberia, when I was growing up, there was no way that a Liberian would have thought that we would be massacring each other to the extent that we did, and especially children would be doing this. We're talking about 9 and 10-year-old taking up arms, executing their parents,